It is wonderful to be able to come and worship with all of you again this morning. Today our sermon starts in a different area that you might not have heard of. It's called the area of Rush. Now the reason you wouldn't have heard of it because of how long ago it was established, but so you know the area we're talking about, it occupied the same parts of Ukraine and parts of Russia that we know today. Now this was founded by a Viking named Oleg in 882. Now Oleg was a very successful Viking in that area at that time. He created major trades through other nations that were around him and he became quite wealthy. However, when he passed away, his son Igor took over the reins. Igor didn't have the business sense his father had, and everything started going downhill quite quickly for him. But he liked the wealthy side of life, and he wanted to hold on to that. So in order to keep that going on in his life, he heavily taxed the people that were under his kingdom. Because he heavily taxed them so much to the point they were suffering. They suffered to just get by on everyday life. A group of people within his kingdom decided to rise up against him and murdered him. Now his only son at the time, please forgive me, I'll probably muddle this up, but Svatoslav was too young to take over, and his wife became the queen of the area and ruled that area. But she loved her husband, and she wanted revenge for his death. And boy, did she get revenge. To start off with, she had all those people that murdered her husband scolded to death, and hundreds of members of that Slavic tribe killed. But that wasn't enough for her. When they sent 20 of their best men to marry her to replace her husband, she had those 20 men burned to death. But she didn't stop there. She invited all the nobles for a feast. And when they all entered into the feast hall, she had the doors locked and them all burned alive. But that wasn't enough to satisfy her rage. She then requested 3 sparrows and a dove from every household. And when she had gathered all of them, she had burning sulfur tied to their legs and set them free to fly back home and set fire to every single house. So why would I bring you a story of a queen that put so much trouble through the people that served her? What I find very interesting is what happened several years later. She took over the reins in 945, but they believe it was 957, about 12 years later, where she was baptized as a Christian. What change came into her life? What change impacted her so much that took her away from that type of character to become the first person to bring Christianity into that region? She brought all of that nation to come to know Christ. What an interesting background she had to turn her life around and change the direction that her life was going. They report so much upon the bad things she did. I'd have loved for them to report on how she came to know Christ. What happened in her life that made her change. But they don't report on that. They're only interested in the bad that she did. She made such a big impact. Every year on July 11th, they have a feast for her. The Catholic Church sainted her because of what she did. When her son took over, because she only died 3 years after her son took leadership, her grandson brought Christianity back again because her son wasn't much into it. And it stuck and never left that region. But there's somebody in the Bible I want to take you to, and we're going to look at Numbers chapter 22. And we're going to be reading the next 2 chapters of somebody who has every opportunity to change his life. And we're going to see what he does with that opportunity. Because we're going to be reading a fair bit, there are a couple of parts we are going to skip over, but I encourage you, if you're not familiar with the story, to go back and read them. Because they are very interesting and parts to read, but we don't have time to go through absolutely everything. I'm going to stop at a few key places in this and have a little bit of a discussion on some of the things we'll come across. But that's Numbers chapter 22 that we're going to be looking at. And it starts off, "Then the people of Israel travelled to the plains of Moab and camped east of the Jordan River across from Jericho. Balak, son of Ziphor, the Moabite king, had seen everything the Israelites did to the Amorites. And when the people of Moab saw how many Israelites there were, they were terrified. The king of Moab said to the elders of Midian, 'This mob will devour everything in sight, like an ox devours grass in the field.' So Balak, son of Moab, sent messengers to call Balaam, son of Beor, who was living in his native land of Pethor, near the Euphrates River. His message said, 'Look, a vast horde of people have arrived from Egypt. They cover the face of the earth and are threatening me. Please come and curse these people for me, because they are too powerful for me. Then perhaps I will be able to conquer them and drive them from the land. I know that blessings fall on any people you bless, and curses fall on any people you curse.' Balak's messengers, who were elders of Moab and Midian, sent out with money to pay Balaam to place a curse upon Israel. They went to Balaam and delivered Balak's message to him. 'Stay here overnight,' Balaam said. 'In the morning I will tell you whatever the Lord directs me to say.' So the officials from Moab stayed there with Balaam. That night God came to Balaam and asked him, 'Who are these men visiting you?' Balaam said to God, 'Balak, son of Ziphor, king of Moab, has sent this message. Look, a vast horde of people has arrived from Egypt, and they cover the face of the earth. Come and curse these people for me. Then perhaps I will be able to stand up to them and drive them from the land.' But God told Balaam, notice this, 'Do not go with them. You are not to curse these people, for they have been blessed.'" Notice how clear God is about the direction he is giving Balaam here. The next morning, Balaam got up and told Balak's officials, "Go on home. The Lord will not let me go with you." Sounds like Balaam's got it all together, doesn't it? So the Moabite officials returned to King Balak and reported, "Balaam refused to come with us." Then Balak tried again. This time he sent a larger number of even more distinguished officials than those he had sent the first time. Then they went to Balaam and delivered this message to him. "This is what Balak, son of Ziphor, says. Please, don't let anything stop you from coming to help me. I will pay you very well and do whatever you tell me. Just come and curse these people for me." But Balaam responded to Balak's messengers, "Even if Balak were to give me his palace filled with silver and gold, I would be powerless to do anything against the will of the Lord." Notice how Balak notices that he can't do anything against God, but God gave him a very clear message the first time that he was not to do anything to those people. But see what Balaam says now. "But stay here one more night and I will see if the Lord has anything else to say to me." You can see Balaam's not too keen on what the Lord has told him. He knows he can't go against the Lord, but he's still hoping for a different answer. That night, God came to Balaam and told him, "Since these men have come for you, get up and go with them, but do only what I tell you to do." So the next morning, Balaam got up, saddled his donkey, and started off with the Moabite officials. But God was angry that Balaam was going, so he sent an angel of the Lord to stand in the road to block his way. We notice that God has sent him. God has given him permission, but God is also angry. We're going to pull that part a little later, but I want you to notice that part of it. As Balaam and two servants were riding along, Balaam's donkey saw an angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand. The donkey bolted off the road into a field, but Balaam beat it and turned it back to the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood at a place where the road narrowed between two vineyard walls. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, it tried to squeeze by and crush Balaam's foot against the wall. So Balaam beat the donkey again. Then the angel of the Lord moved further down the road and stood in a place too narrow for the donkey to get by at all. This time, when the donkey saw the angel, it lay down under Balaam. In a fit of rage, Balaam beat the animal again with his staff. Then the Lord gave the donkey the ability to speak. "What have I done to you that deserves your beating me 3 times?" it asked Balaam. "You have made me look like a fool," Balaam shouted. "If I had a sword with me, I would kill you." Would that be your response if a donkey started talking to you? Would you reprimand the donkey when it starts speaking? Or would you be more concerned that a donkey was speaking to you? I'll touch on why Balaam's not surprised a little bit later on, but notice that part. Continuing on in verse 30. "But I am the same donkey you have ridden all your life," the donkey answered. "Have I ever done anything like this before?" "No," Balaam admitted. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the roadway with a drawn sword in his hand. Balaam bowed his head and fell face down on the ground before him. "Why did you beat your donkey those 3 times?" the angel of the Lord demanded. "Look, I have come to block your way because you stubbornly resisting me." 3 times the donkey saw me and shielded away. Otherwise, I would certainly have killed you by now and spared the donkey. Then Balaam confessed to the angel of the Lord, "I have sinned. I didn't realize you were standing in the road to block my way. I will return home if you are against my going." Notice the change of heart Balaam has here. But the angel of the Lord told Balaam, "Go with these men, but say only what I tell you to say." So Balaam went on with Balak's officials. When King Balak heard that Balaam was on his way, he went out to meet him at the Moabite town on the Arnon River, at the furthest point of his land. "Didn't I send an urgent invitation? Why didn't you come right away?" Balak asked Balaam. "Didn't you believe me when I said I would reward you richly?" Balaam replied, "Look, now I have come, but I have no power to say whatever I want. I will speak only the message that God puts in my mouth." Sounds like he's still got it all together, doesn't it? But let's continue on, verse 39. Then Balaam accompanied Balak and to Kiriath Hishor, where the king sacrificed cattle and sheep. He sent portions of the meat to Balaam, and to the officials who were with him. The next morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal. From there he could see some of the people of Israel spread out below him. Then Balaam said to King Balak, "Build me 7 altars here, and prepare 7 young bulls and 7 rams for me to sacrifice." Notice Balaam being very specific here. God never told him what type of sacrifice to prepare. God never told him how many altars to build. But Balaam knows for some reason, and we'll get to that later. Balak followed his instructions, and the 2 of them sacrificed a young bull and ram on each altar. Then Balaam said to Balak, "Stand here by your burnt offerings, and I will go to see if the Lord will respond to me. Then I will tell you whatever he reveals to me." So Balaam went alone to the top of the bare hill, and God met him there. Balaam said to him, "I have prepared 7 altars and have sacrificed a young bull and ram on each altar." The Lord gave Balaam a message for King Balak. Then he said, "Go back to Balak and give him my message." So Balaam returned and found the king standing beside his burnt offerings with all the officials of Moab. Now, this is the message of blessing that the God gave to Balaam. I encourage you to go back and read it if you haven't read them. But we're going to jump down to verse 11. Then King Balak demanded of Balaam, "What have you done to me? I brought you to curse my enemies. Instead, you have blessed them." But Balaam replied, "I will speak only the message that the Lord puts in my mouth." Then King Balak told him, "Come with me to another place. Then you will see another part of the nation of Israel. But not all of them. Curse at least that many." So Balak took Balaam to the plateau of Ziphon on Pisgah Peak. He built 7 altars there and offered a young bull and ram on each altar. Then Balaam said to the king, "Stand here by your burnt offerings while I go there to meet the Lord." And the Lord met Balaam and gave him a message. Then he said, "Go back to Balak and give him my message." So Balaam returned and found the king standing beside his burnt offerings with all the officials of Moab. "What did the Lord say?" Balak asked eagerly. And we've got another message of blessing, but we'll jump down to verse 25. Then Balak said to Balaam, "Fine, but if you won't curse them, at least don't bless them." But Balaam said to Balak, "Didn't I tell you that I can do only what the Lord tells me?" Then Balak said to Balaam, "Come, I will take you to one more place. Perhaps it will please God to let you curse them from there." So Balak took Balaam to the top of Mount Peor, overlooking the wasteland. Balaam again told Balak, "Build me 7 altars and prepare 7 young bulls and 7 rams for me to sacrifice." So Balak did as Balaam ordered and offered a young bull and ram on each altar. By now Balaam realized that the Lord was determined to bless Israel. Notice that. It took until now for Balaam to realize that God was going to bless Israel no matter what. Right at the beginning, in the first time he communed with God, he said that those people would not be cursed. But it's taken till now for Balaam to realize. Let's continue on. So he did not resort to divination as before. Instead, he turned and looked out toward the wilderness, where he saw the people of Israel camped, tribe by tribe. Then the Spirit of God came upon him, and we've got another message of blessing here. But we'll jump down to verse 10. King Balak flew into a rage against Balaam. He angrily clapped his hands and shouted, "I called you to curse my enemies. Instead, you have blessed them 3 times. Now get out of here. Go back home. I promised to reward you richly, but the Lord has kept you from your reward." Notice here the king's response. The Lord has kept you from your reward. What reward could anybody on earth keep us from what God has to offer us? And yet the king thinks he's higher and mightier than what God is. Let's continue on in verse 12. Balaam told Balak, "Don't you remember what I told your messengers? I said, even if Balak were to give me his palace filled with silver and gold, I would be powerless to do anything against the will of the Lord. I told you that I could say only what the Lord says. Now I'm returning to my own people. But first, let me tell you what the Israelites will do to your people in the future." And for the rest of the chapter, we see that Balaam is telling Balak how the Israelites, because of his actions, is going to take over their nation. How they're going to suffer because of the king's actions. After all this, Balaam looks like he's in a pretty good place, doesn't he? It looks like he's following what God has told him. He's not trying to go against God at this point. He's doing exactly what God says because he knows there is no power greater than our God. He knows there's nothing on this earth that can stand against him. But Balaam doesn't actually stop there. Balaam continues because there is something that he seeks, and he seeks the riches that the king has to offer. And this is why, at the beginning, Balaam consulted God the second time. It is why Balaam asked all those officials to stay in his house the second time, because Balaam is so determined to get that money. Balaam is so determined to please that king. Balaam does not want to let this opportunity go by. Balaam had everything stand in his way, and yet he still is determined. He knows everything that is going on, and he's still determined to go against God. We see later on in the beginning of chapter 24 that Balaam did not resort to divination. Balaam was somebody who continuously resorted to divination. That is why he knew to build 7 altars and to sacrifice upon each of those altars to speak to God. This wasn't the first time he's done it. Obviously, he's done it much more than this. But he talked with God. Each one of us is eager to talk with God, and Balaam has this opportunity. But we are going to see what happens after all of this, after all this opportunity he's been given. In chapter 25, we see where Moab seduces Israel, and all the women of that nation go to seduce the men. This is where we find the story of one of the men of Israel, one of the leaders, taking one of the leading women into his tent, and the terrible things that are happening. So one of the guys in the tribe of Levi grabs his spear and thrusts it through the woman and into the man. And that's when the cursing stopped for Israel. But why did the tribe of Moab do this? If you jump over with me to Numbers chapter 31 and verse 8, we start to see why all this came about. That was Numbers chapter 31 and verse 8. And it reads, "All 5 of the Midianite kings, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, died at the battle. They also killed Balaam, son of Beor, with the sword." We see here Balaam has decided where to stand. He has gone against the Israelites and fought in physical battle against them. The same Israelites he blessed 3 times. He told Balak what was going to happen, and he still sided where he was going to die. Don't you think he would have got the hint by now? Don't you think something would have clicked after everything he's done, after talking directly with God, after acknowledging that there is no greater power than God, and he still decides to go against him? Jump down with me to verse 16. These are the very ones who followed Balaam's advice and caused the people of Israel to rebel against the Lord at Mount Peor. They are the ones who caused the plague to strike the Lord's people. Balaam could not curse Israel. There was nothing Balaam could do to go against what the Lord told him to say. But after all of that, after Balak told him to go home, he came up with a plan to get his reward, to get the money he wanted so badly. And he had the kings of the area order the females to go to seduce the men of Israel. He was so determined for that reward. Even after blessing them, he found a way to bring a curse upon Israel, to find their weak point. He would not stand against Yahweh directly and go against what Yahweh said, but he found a way around it. He found a way around it to appease Balak, to try and get the reward, the earthly reward he wanted. But if you jump over with me to Joshua chapter 13 and verse 22, we find Balaam mentioned again over here. That's Joshua chapter 13 and verse 22. And it reads, "The Israelites had also killed Balaam, son of Beor, who used magic to tell the future." We see Balaam's trade. We see what Balaam did for money. We see that Balaam not only consulted with God, but he also consulted with the devil. A man that had the opportunity to turn against the devil by speaking directly with the Lord still chose to side with the devil. We see that this is why Balaam was not surprised a donkey talked to him, because he lived in the world of the supernatural. This was a daily occurrence for him. This is something he meddled in regularly. Yet he still knew that God was more powerful than the devil, and he still sided with the devil in all of this. In Jude 11, we find that Balaam quite often received profit from deceiving people. But Balaam still did not get the message. He was quite happy to live this lifestyle. In fact, in 1967, at an archaeological site east of the Jordan, they found a section of a wall with plaster inscriptions on it. What is interesting about this is that quite a lot of it refers back to Balaam. The laboratory tests on it dated to approximately 800 BC, which is just before the Israel deportation into Assyria in 722 BC. The language of the inscription is both in Aramaic and Canaanite features. And what it reads is, in the first part of the inscription, a council of hostile gods opposes El. El is Yahweh. It's another name they use for Yahweh. Balaam receives a vision from El warning that this council plans to force Shagar and Ishtar, the goddess of fertility and light, to close the heavens so the land would remain in darkness and chaos. The text becomes a bit more broken and unclear, and then they pick it back up again, where Balaam apparently warns the leaders, and somehow the impending disaster is averted, probably through magical rites performed by Balaam. The second part of all the inscription is even more fragmented, and there's a lot of debate about it, but several lines refer to the seers and the divination work that they perform. Balaam is given every single opportunity. Balaam lives in the world of the supernatural. He recognizes that Yahweh is the most powerful around, and that Yahweh is more powerful than any other god. But he still doesn't follow him. We read this queen, she took the chance to change her life around. She did horrible and terrible things, and yet she took a chance to turn her life around. But Balaam didn't. I want to share with you a story about two battleships that were assigned on a training squadron that had been moving around in heavy weather. And on the lead ship, night was falling, and the visibility became very poor. There was fog everywhere, and it was hard for most people to see. So the captain decided to stay up that night and stay on the bridge of the ship. After a little while into the shift, the lookout on the wing of the bridge called "Light bearing on the starboard bow." The captain quickly replied, "Is it steady or moving astern?" The lookout replied, "Steady, captain," which meant they were on a dangerous collision course with that other ship. The captain then called to the signalman, "Signal that ship, we are on a collision course, advise you change 20 degrees. Back came the signal, "Advisable for you to change 20 degrees. The captain said, "Send, I am a captain, change course 20 degrees. The response came back, "I am a seaman second class. You had better change course 20 degrees. By now the captain was enraged. A seaman second class giving him an order? That would not stand. He spat out, "Send, I am a battleship, change course 20 degrees. Back came the flashing light, "I am a lighthouse." The captain quickly changed course. How often do we get caught up in our own lives? How often do we think we are so much in the right that we fail to see when we are in the wrong? How often do we commune with God daily and not let Him keep changing our lives? How often do we not let Him keep working on our lives? How often do we just get stuck in that rut and think we are good enough in the relationship we currently have with God? How much do we invite the devil when we become stagnant in our relationship with Christ to start to wean away against our relationship? If we don't continually keep growing, we are at risk of losing the beautiful part that Christ has for us. The beautiful gift He has to change our lives more and more like His. To take on that lifestyle that we so desperately want. To have that love, peace and comfort in our life. And to share that with other people around us. The Queen changed her life to embrace that loving relationship with Christ. Balaam had the opportunity and rejected it. It is up to us to decide if we want to continue growing in our daily lives with Christ, or if we want to become stagnant and comfortable where we are, and not to face what parts of our lives the devil is trying to impact. It's because at no point can we stop growing in our relationship. At no point are we a perfect human being. Every part of our lives, we are still in need of a Saviour. And Christ wants to keep making us more and more like Him, to represent Him to everyone else here on this earth. Christ has given us a beautiful gift in His death to bring salvation to us. And it is for us to share that with other people. But in order to do that, we need to let God make those changes in our lives so that we can show other people what it means to know somebody like Christ. Thank you.